Good evening. Welcome to the pre-concert talks with KHFM's Brent Stevens. That's me. I'm Brent Stevens, and we'd like to thank the law firm of Kelleher and McLeod for sponsoring these talks. They've been longtime supporters of the arts in Albuquerque. Give them a hand. We have a great and quite a varied program for you tonight, and I'm pleased to introduce the maestro for this evening, Marcelo Lettinger. So, Marcelo, if it's okay, let's start with the pieces in order. First of all, you are Brazilian, so tell me a little bit about what the music of Villa-Lobos means to Brazil.
Well, good evening. It's a really pleasure to be here, and I've been having a wonderful time with this great orchestra you have in this community. Bravo. So Villa-Lobos, he is, without a doubt, he's the most important Brazilian composer. Certainly the most well-known Brazilian composer. And he was an interesting man. He was a genius. He composed so much for many different genres, for orchestra, chamber music, for guitar, for cello, of course, and piano. So he was a really creative man and incredible personality. I mean, he used to work in the floor. He said if he were in the desk, the pages fell on the floor, so he just preferred to be on the floor. And then he composed a guitar concerto here, and a symphony here, and a piano concerto here, everything at the same time. Had a good idea, put in here, not a great idea, put in there. Then run out of the idea, just put a C major chord. And he was really incredible in that, personality-wise and very creative. Moved to France, lived years in France, met with incredible personalities that was in Paris in the 20s, and had close relationships with composers like Messiaen and people like that. And then he came to America actually later in his life. He was conductor of the St. Louis Symphony, and also he was actually hired by Hollywood to compose a piece for a movie. So he arrived in Hollywood with the piece. And the producers, they look, say, no, you don't understand how it works. We need to give you the movie. So you watch the movie and you write the music based on the movie. And he said, no, you don't understand. I write the piece and you make your movie based on my piece. So he got fired, and then later in his life, he went back to Brazil. He was very much into ecology and the nature, and also he loved the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. That was his idol. So he composed this set of pieces called Bachianas Brasileiras, Brazilian Bachianas, which basically Bachianas means in the style of Bach.
And this is the fifth of those, composed somewhere between, I think, in the late 1930s, early 40s.
Yeah, it is the fifth one. It's dedicated to his wife, the second. And it's just incredible because I think the movement we're going to perform tonight is the aria, is the first movement of the piece. And just, to have that group of 8 celli with a soprano and performing, this incredible, beautiful, mellow music in the Bach style, it's really one of his most popular and beautiful music.
I looked at the program. I don't think the lyrics are printed there, but essentially it's a description of first the clouds and then the moon, and he likens the moon to a young woman getting ready. So now we move on to the second piece. Okay.
Good idea.
So he didn't have a funny line for that. Is that good or what? The second piece, it comes from Beethoven's era, from the classical era. nobody's really heard of this composer. He was a copyist, he was a theater guy, and we had an interesting conversation with Douglas Cardwell the other day. Most orchestras in a town would have had 2 timpani at that time. So for them to even conceive of this piece, they probably had to go to outlying towns and get the other 6 timpani and bring them in. The modern timpani is not only tunable, which means that you can stretch the drums, but it also has pitch, so you can use a pedal to change pitches, which is where you get some of the modern music with scales. But this piece is not. These are all one-tune drums, right? So what are we listening for?
Exactly, and as Doug was saying, actually he can't reach the pedals because there's so many. I mean, look at this. There's moments that he's playing, he play, you know, it's incredible, the technique. It's interesting because when you think about a timpani concerto, of course you think about modern music, and the fact that you have a classical music period written for the timpani and having the timpani doing melodies and scales, and it's really interesting. You don't hear that often, and I think it really showcases when you're listening a symphonic concert. Of course, you have the timpani playing in the back of the orchestra. Some pieces, especially somewhere after the 19th century, there are very hard parts for the timpani, but you don't really get too familiar with that instrument as you will tonight, just for the fact that you have the timpani right in front of you, and you'll see the possibilities of the instrument when you have a set of 8 drums as you have here. So it's interesting to hear instrument that you think will do something modern, but yet doing classical period music. And this composer actually, he died in the 1800s. So it is kind of it's contemporary to Beethoven, but I think in style you can see that it's almost before Beethoven.
It's a little more Baroque. It's more like a ceremonial piece.
Very
really.
much so, and I think that's why the flowing of the program actually it's very interesting because you have a modern piece but in Bach style, so Baroque, and then you have this piece leading into the Beethoven Symphony, which is the second part of his life, and it was pretty much already shifting the music history to what we will call Romanticism.
So I think before we start talking about the Beethoven, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but a basic tour through music history, there's the pre-Baroque music and the Renaissance music, and then there's the music of the Baroque era, which is Bach and Vivaldi. Bach's sons are really more composers in the classical era. The classical era is, Haydn is the huge figure of the classical era. Basically invented the quartet, the string quartet, finalized the way that classical symphonies were structured. Almost all of them 3 movements, a fast, slow, fast. Along comes Mozart, and we don't know where Mozart really would have gone because Mozart died before he was 40 years old. He was starting to look towards the future. Then you have Beethoven. So his early works very much in the style of Haydn, even though he's changing things harmonically, and he has the 4-movement symphony. One of his innovations is to take the minuet and just speed it up, and that becomes a scherzo, and then that's Beethoven's innovation. But somewhere around the age of 30, Beethoven is unsatisfied with the direction of his music, and he changes things forever, and especially with this symphony, the Eroica.
True, and of course, as we know, Beethoven went to Vienna. He's from Bonn, German, but he went to Vienna to study with Mozart, and that didn't happen. So he actually ended up studying, among others, with Haydn. But I think he was just a characteristic of his personality. He was never satisfied. He always needed more. He always needed to change. He changed himself so many times. His life was a mess, and of course, not even his personal life in terms of relationships don't even open that door. But one thing that I think it's so important when you talk about Beethoven is that the fact that in his 20s he decided to write a testament. But it's not the typical testament that you would imagine, just leaving his assets and his money to somebody. It's a testament where he telling the people that he needs to be a lonely person. He needs to, he excluding himself from society, from having friends, participating in society, just because he needed to be alone. And the fact that he needed to be alone is that because he knew he was losing his hearing in very fast speed, and he knew that he would become a very difficult man, personality-wise. And I think that shows a man with great heart, because we talk about Beethoven being difficult, being hard, being rude, but I think that's an incredible human being that actually think about the other people and say, I cannot be with you because I'm going to treat you bad just because I'm not well. And so he wrote that in his 20s. So I think every time we listen the music of Beethoven, we need to think about that. And of course, that makes someone a very, of course, it makes you a difficult personality, searching for a voice, searching for yourself, trying to change. And that was reflecting his music, where basically we're defining 3 periods, but the first period is pretty much Haydn and Mozart and that kind of style. And then there's this symphony, which we're going to hear tonight, which is the 3rd, Eroica, which nobody, at that period, it was completely new. Although the form, it's pretty much in the classical.
And the size of the orchestra even. I think it adds a 3rd horn. It's the normal classical orchestra.
It's the normal classical orchestra with the 3rd horn, which was, nobody wrote 3 horns in the symphony before, so that was another innovation. But even though it is in the classical style in terms of structure, it was something that nobody never heard before. It was completely innovating.
And at the time, people didn't know what to make of it. One critic wrote that he loved Beethoven, but he really didn't understand this piece, and he complained that it was nearly an hour long. The first movement alone is about as long as a normal classical symphony. That's just one of the innovations. We talked about this. I have a recording of Bernstein doing this, and he talks about it. It has Bernstein talking about it, about the opening 2 beats, these 2 hammer blows of the orchestra. Beethoven immediately takes you into a minor key and then comes back again and establishes the melody, just to sort of, I don't know, set you on edge or announce triumphantly that we're going where no man has gone before.
True. And no introduction, as you said, the introduction 2 chords. But of course, also the very important thing about this symphony is the fact that he wrote, not only dedicated, but wrote to Napoleon. And then a year later, when the symphony was already written, Napoleon basically betrayed people and declared himself emperor and invaded, among other places, Austria. And of course, Beethoven was extremely hurted, very upset. And he decided to erase the dedication to Napoleon. I actually had the experience of going to Vienna and seeing this original score, and it's really interesting because of course, we didn't have anything that we have today to erase. So back in that time, it was the knife, where you just by trying to take off the ink from the paper. But you imagine Beethoven will never do this, so he was probably just doing in a very angry way, and there's a hole in the page. There's just created a hole, and you just see the end Arte in the that he left of Bonaparte. So, and many people, of course, it was the music was about Napoleon. He wrote about it. He said, many times about this, but. Many people think it's also about himself, as thinking as a hero, not an egocentric hero, but a hero of living in a difficult world and, trying to live with this hearing problem and going through life. And so the second movement is that moment that it's just incredible because it's a funeral march.
And Beethoven was a deep thinker. He was a thinker of the fate of mankind and the future of mankind, not waiting for others to write lyrics for him. And so all of his music from this point on starts to reflect his deep feeling for humanity as well as his feeling for music and where it's going as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Ending with the Ninth Symphony, which is Ode to Joy, and basically talking about friendship, and with lyrics of Schindler, of course, but he used that lyrics in his music. So he was a visionary man that completely changed the course of music history. And he was, we wouldn't have anyone that we know today if Beethoven didn't exist.
No, it's true. It leads to not only his later music, but the Romantic era, the 20th century, and all the other composers who followed him. The other thing Beethoven does is take amazingly simple elements and find different ways to change them so that throughout his works, you hear that motif come back and you think, oh, he's good, and then all of a sudden he's off in a different direction. I think he's a master of finding enough times to tease you with the same thing, to draw you back in and feel just comfortable enough that he can take you in a new direction. And that's throughout this symphony.
Yeah, and throughout all his music, I mean, we say that Beethoven was not a good melodist. I mean, he didn't know how to write melodies. But he was incredible in taking a small motif or a small combination of notes and developing that in a 50 minutes piece. And I mean, I remember, you just mentioned Bernstein. I remember I saw an interview with Bernstein or something. It was a video where he's talking about this, and his example was the Seventh Symphony. And he say, look, the melody is bum, 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 bum. Is that a good melody? So, I mean, two notes. But what he does with that, combining with harmony and developing, I mean, it's just incredible.
There's a melody in this singing, ba da 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 da. I can't count, but how many notes is that even? And yet it comes back again and again.
Yes,
faster than me.
But the thing is, and that basically is just it's the key. I mean, it's just a.
It's an arpeggio. That's all it is. Yeah.
Just arpeggios. Dee da dee da dee da da dee.
Can we talk about something else?
What he does with that 8 notes.
There's something else that I want to talk to you about, and it's tempos. And the way that tempos, especially in music of Beethoven that everyone's so familiar with, have changed so much over time. And you had an experience, because Beethoven, at the beginning of his career, there was no metronome, and then he went back at various times in his life and added metronome markings to his music. Tell us a little bit about that.
Let's talk about tempo. Let's see how much time we have to talk about tempo. No, it's a very... a lot of people debate still today about Beethoven's tempi and Beethoven's metronome markings. Basically, there are many reasons why, but some of his markings are just nearly impossible to play. Not only for the orchestra, but even for other instruments. I mean, there's some of the piano sonatas that he put a metronome marking that is just, I mean, not even if you have 3 hands. So it's really, really hard. I think, you imagine a man of that kind of personality. I think he was not trying to be absolutely precise and mathematical, that you need to play at 126, and if you play 124, then you're not doing a good job. I mean, that was mainly just a kind of trying to create something that I think he allows the interpreter to be a little faster, a little slower, and it's okay. Now, a little faster or a little slower. The problem is, I believe it started with Mahler and Wagner. And Wagner wrote books about how to interpret Beethoven's symphony. Crazy. And if you look Mahler's score, for example, when he conducted Beethoven's 5th symphony, he put 3 bowings in the fermatas. Da, 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 da. Da, da. I mean, so and then, of course, all the conductors after this, they thought, they That was a tradition. And then the recordings started. And that created another problem because, of course, people doing the recordings, they were very much romantic conductors who came from Mahler and Wagner and from that kind of traditions, and they thought that, you know, you need to do slow and everything exaggerated and romantic in a way, and they put that on tape, which is forever. It's there on tape. And then my generation came, and then you listen to the recordings thinking that's, you know, how you should be interpreting the music, although there's many different tempi with different conductors. So my father's German, and he's old school German musician. So basically, I didn't sleep through my teens thinking about this. It's fast, it's slow, what should I, you know, I couldn't, I mean, it was a big dilemma for me. And there was a musicologist in Germany that wrote a book called Prestissimo. And her theory was that we're playing Beethoven twice as fast that it was supposed to be. And she gave the example, the first metronome was a pendule, and then he got the second metronome, and then he changed his markings. Anyway, so...
And by the time he got his second metronome, he didn't have hearing. So he was referring to a visual
to a visual,
tick.
yes. But, hey, and it's this big, so I think he could see that. But the thing is, when I went to Vienna to study, I was traveling with Maestro Mazur as his assistant, and he put me in touch with someone in the Musikverein building, and I went to the archivals to see manuscripts and documents. And so basically I went to the safe, which is a place that nobody's allowed. You enter a door, they close the door. I'm a little claustrophobic, so I wasn't ready. And then they open another door, and then you go, and then they open safe door, crazy. So I got there, and the person who was receiving me said, "What do you want to see?" I said, "Beethoven's metronome." He said, "That's the first thing you want to see?" I said, "Yeah, I knew it was there." He said, "Interesting, why?" So I was talking, well, you know, my dilemma and the fact that I was not sleeping. And
and your father.
And yeah, at that point, I think I stopped talking to my father about this. But and then he said, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to bring some documents. I think you'll be interested in that." I said, "Okay." So he brought the metronome, you know, old but working just fine. And then he brought documents like another metronome markings that Beethoven did in 1817. And I mean, a lot of interesting documents. And then he brought some documents of the time where they relate how long the pieces were when they were premieres. And I remember very clearly that one was the Pastoral Symphony. And by the time it was premiered in that long concert that Beethoven gave, it was 40-something minutes of music, so it's about the same we do, maybe even faster. So I was very interested. Wow, that was a discovery. So we start talking about this. He's a wonderful musicologist, the director of this archival. And he was just explaining me all surround these problems and the markings and the period instrument performances and so much information that, you know, for me proved that Beethoven was fast, or the same speed we're playing today.
So that's fascinating. It's the length of pieces as noted when they were actually performed in Beethoven's time.
Now, still is a problem because people say, well, maybe there was cuts. Oh. And, or they say, well, you just mentioned, you know, the reviewer that said this is an hour symphony. I think that's the Grove. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I read that book. And then he referred, well, if this is, the document said that it was an hour long, maybe we're playing too fast. Well, listen, someone can say, oh, this is a 1 hour long symphony, and it's 50 minutes. It's an expression, right? So anyway, and then there's so many musicians and conductors today exploring this and going back and studying period instruments and how the instruments worked at that moment and going back to a more classical vision of how to interpret Beethoven, including the tempi marking. So I can sleep now.
I guess so. Listen for tempo. I think we have time for a couple of questions. If you wouldn't mind bringing up the house lights a little bit. If anyone has a question, shout it out.
I'm sure we didn't have to go down to Los Lunas or Berlin for extra timpani, but where did we get them?
Mansell, that's a good question. Where did we get the timpani?
Douglas Cardwell is a Pearl Adams artist, and he, as a Pearl Adams artist, they sent a couple of drums for him to work with, and they also treated him to a really special artist deal on the remaining drums. So these are very special drums, and he's a very special artist.
But since he's paying off the drums, that means if you would like to have this piece repeated in your home for the holidays, contact Doug Cardwell through the symphony.
Bar mitzvahs, you know, whatever.
Anyone else? Oh, down here.
Oh, here you go.
This is such an unusual program we have tonight, not your typical symphony lineup. How much input did you have into the selection of the music?
Well, I think you could hear the question, right? She was using microphone? Okay. So, thank you, Jackie. The program selection was, as I remember, it was a long time ago that I was invited to do this. I mean, 1.5 or 2 years ago, probably. As I remember, it was the timpani piece and the Eroica Symphony was already in the program. They wanted to do those two pieces. I didn't conduct the timpani piece, but I looked at the score and read about it. I thought, oh, interesting, that'll be fun to do. The Beethoven Symphony I did a few times, so always great music to conduct. And then they want an overture or opening piece. And I think I suggest many different options of what to do, kind of trying to keep with some kind of theme of classical music or chronological music history, something like that. And they like the idea of Villa-Lobos. And I think also it's one of the other reasons the program actually is interesting, because you're going to experience one section of the orchestra, only the cello playing with the soprano, and then you're going to experience the timpani, and then you have the full orchestra, of course. So I think it's a piece, and this symphony, there's so many individual playing solos. The oboe has a very important part, the French horns, that showcase a lot of different sections of the orchestra. So this is a program that actually showcases the orchestra very well.
Well, I think that is our time. We'd like to thank Kelleher and MacLeod again for sponsoring these pre-concert talks. Thank you folks very much for coming, and thank Maestro Levington.
Thank you.